Hello everyone, today we're going to be covering deploying a Rails application, specifically running Rails 7.1, which isn't released yet. We're just taking a look at what the workflow is going to be like to an Amazon EC2 instance. So if you're not familiar with Amazon, it looks a little bit like this. It's a complete cluster of a dashboard. I absolutely despise it, but I know people use it, so I'm going to try and walk you through this. In this case, Amazon does have a free T2.micro server. I have tried this with a micro. It worked for me. I'm going to be using a small here though, because I don't really have a lot of time before this video has to go up. So I need a little bit more computing power than the free tier offers. So we're just going to go ahead and use that. I'm going to go ahead and actually terminate this server real quick, which I can totally do by clicking on instance state and clicking terminate. That'll get rid of it. And now we can go ahead and click on launch instances. So to get started, I guess I should go through the full workflow. You're going to go to aws.amazon.com. You're going to sign in to your AWS account. And then let me make sure I'm zoomed in appropriately. You're going to find EC2 right here. If it's not here, you can come up to the top and search for EC2. And if you don't want to do that, you can click on services and find EC2 in here. After you go to the EC2 page, you'll see a launch instance button. We can go ahead and click on that. We can then click on launch instance. We can name this whatever we'd like. I'm going to name mine AWS_video, and then we can do a quick start. Now they do have multiple images available to you. You can click on like Ubuntu or the AWS Linux version, or you can come up here and you can search for something. And because Rails 7.1 ships with a Dockerfile built in, we can actually just search for like Docker and then our OS of choice. So maybe Ubuntu. We can come in here, it'll tell us no results found because Amazon's super broken. And then for some reason, it'll magically find results because, I don't know, it loads that before it finishes rendering or before it finishes getting the data. So here we have my Docker file of choice. It's the first option. We're going to go with the Peacehaven Corp one that has no reviews, I guess. And yeah, so we'll just go with this one. It's fine. Not really important. We're just going to click on this. We just need a server that has Docker on it, which this seems to have, and it seems to have the traditional pricing for all of the tiers, which means you get your free tier available for the micro instances. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, click continue. They're probably going to question why I've spun up like 3 of these today. And then we're going to come down here to the instance type. We're going to make sure to check off of the large because we can't afford that. And you can come up here to the T2.micro if you're so inclined. I'm going to click on the T2.small because it has a little bit more RAM, which means this will run a little bit faster for me. Then we have to select a key pair, or you can create a new key pair. I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to call this one AWS_video. We can go with either RSA or ED. It doesn't matter at all, really. And we can save it as a PEM file if we're so inclined. I'm going to go ahead and create the key pair. After you create it, it's going to prompt you to save it. You're going to want to do that. I'm going to save mine into my A drive, but we're going to have to move this into our WSL instance whenever we get the chance. So I'm going to save this as AWS_video. And then we can come down here. It's going to ask us for security group stuff. We're going to say create a new group so I can show you how to fix what's broken. And then we're going to allow HTTPS and HTTP traffic. You can also change this to allow your own custom IP if you click on the anywhere. But I'm not interested in showing you what my IP is. Just trust me, there's a button here that says use my own IP, which means you'll only be able to SSH in from your current IP. Important to note, if your IP changes, if you lose access to that computer, etc., this will be a problem. So be careful if you do that. But you can always just log in here to fix it. Then we're going to come down to the configure storage. And in here, we're going to look for something that says magnetic. It says the word standard after it, which to me seems to be like the option we want to go with because we're not trying anything fancy here. So now we have either a micro or a small instance that's going to have Docker installed on it by default. We can go ahead and click launch instance, and that'll go through those setup processes. While that's running, I'm going to talk about what we're going to do here. I probably forgot to close out of this server here. So what we're doing is we're going to create a new Rails app using Rails 7.1, which is currently only available on the main branch. So to do that, we're going to type Rails new video space -- main, and it's that easy to grab it from the main branch. We can then talk about what we're going to be using. So this does run with Docker. It does come with Docker, which means you're going to want to have Docker installed on your computer. And you can get that by going over to the Docker website, which is, I don't know, docker.com, I guess. You can see all my troubleshooting there. And then you're going to want to download the Docker desktop app. If you have WSL installed, you can click on the little cog wheel, and then you can come down to here to use the WSL2 based engine. That'll allow you to use your Docker commands. If I type Docker in here, inside of your WSL instance. Pretty nifty. Once that's done, you can pretty much ignore this. You always want to make sure this is open, otherwise you lose the ability to use your Docker commands. But in this case, we have it open, so we're good to go. Okay, so now let's CD into our video app, and let's decide what we're going to make. We're going to do a basic Rails G scaffold. We're going to give it a post with a title and a body of type text. Well, actually, let's just give it a title. We'll add some additional stuff so we can see how the action text works. So let's go ahead and let's do a Rails G action underscore text :install command. And then let's run a code dot to open this up in VS Code. We're just doing this so that we can see that active storage does in fact work like this with the persisting of the data. We can come into our config and our routes.rb. In here, we can set the root to be the post controller and the index action. Let me hit Control+ so you can see this. Once we're done with that, we can come into the app models post.rb, and we can say this has rich text for the body. We can then come into the app controllers and the post controller. And then the post controller at the bottom here after the title, we want to permit the body. There we go. And then finally, we have to come into our app views, posts, and the form, because we need to make a rich underscore text underscore area for the body. We can grab that. And then we want to do one up here for the label as well. And then finally, we come into our underscore post.html.erb. We copy this, we paste it in here, we grab this div so that we can make this wrapped by a div, and then we just say, hey, can you put the body inside of this div? Something like that. My formatter's broken, that's totally fine. We're pretty much done here. So I'm gonna go ahead and actually close out of all of this because I have the utmost faith that this will work. And we can go ahead and run a Rails S and come over to localhost port 3000, where it'll hopefully tell us that we have to run our migrations. There we go. So we just click run pending migrations, and now we're good to go. We can create a new post, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, hit enter a couple times and attach the, the Docker whale, click create post, and that's working. So what are we actually going to be doing here? We're going to be grabbing this Dockerfile right here that ships with Rails by default now, which specifies stuff like the Ruby version we want to use, the tools we want to install, which includes the build essentials and libvips. You'll recognize this as a requirement to use vips for your image processing with active storage. We're going to set a working directory, which is just where inside of the Docker container the Rails stuff exists at, which is going to be inside of /Rails. We then set some environment variables. So we want the Rails log to std out to be set to 1, serve static assets to be set to true, the environment to be set to production, and the bundle without to be set with without development, I guess. We then copy the gem file and the gem file.lock, which comes from right here, and we copy that into the root of our working directory. So we're going to copy these two files into the /Rails directory inside the Docker container. And then from inside of this Rails directory that now has this gem file, we run a bundle install, which of course, if we check in here, also includes our Rails stuff. So it's going to be installing Rails into that container. We then copy all the code that we're missing here into the Docker container, which again, this is our working directory. It's a bit deceptive, but we copy from our current directory, which we're going to be in our Rails root, into the current directory in the Docker container, which is this /Rails directory. This is why I hate Docker. It's so needlessly confusing, even in its simplicity. Then we run a bootsnap precompile to make code faster, I guess. We then precompile some assets with a secret key base dummy, which I didn't even know existed. DHH kind of blew my mind with that one. Then we come down here to the entry point, which is calling /Rails/bin/Docker entry point. If we come into there, we can go into our bin directory or Docker entry point. You can see in here that if we run the ./bin/Rails server, it then runs a db prepare. So if we're running the Rails server command to start our server with this Docker container, it'll run the db prepare command, which will do our migrations or our database creation. And then finally, we expose port 3000 because we want to run this as Rails S port 3000. And this is exposing it from the Docker container to the computer, not from the computer to the internet. It's important to note. Because there's ports for the Docker containers that communicate with the computers as well. And then it executes a command, which is this ./bin/rails with the server argument, which, as you'll recall from the Docker entry point, is exactly what this is looking for. So that's going to guarantee this is going to run if we run it through this Dockerfile. Okay, so all of that's very confusing. Basically what happens is this sets up your whole Rails application so you don't really have to think a whole lot, which is great. But to do all of this, we need to do a couple things. First, we need to do a git add dot because we need to use a git repository to get this code onto our server. We're going to do a git commit. I'm going to title this, I'm going to give it -m, and then we'll say this is the init commit. And now we need to go create a git repo. And thankfully, you're with the guy who's had to create like 200 of these at this point. And for reference for the commands we're going to be running here, I do have resources in the video description, including this GitHub repo from the video from the other day, which will have all of the commands you need to run. There's only 3 of them, so it's pretty cool. We're going to go with AWS_video as the name of this repository. AWS_video. There we go. And then we're going to come down here and click Create Repository. Once that's done, we can hopefully make sure we're on SSH, grab this, and in here we can paste these 3 lines in. That will push that up to the Git repo, just like that. And now we can come in here and we can clone either from SSH or HTTPS. It ultimately depends on what you want to do. In my case, I guess I'll do the disgusting thing. I'll be a big boy. I'll say, let's do the SSH stuff. So once we're done with that, I can come in here and inside of our, let's cd into our mnt/a, I think is where I saved it. In here, what we want to do is we want to cp-r the AWS_video.pem file to our /code directory. We can now cd back to our /code. The reason why we're doing that is because this allows us to set our permissions inside of the AWS file structure. So now we can do a sudo chmod for, I don't know, like 600 for the, what do we call it? AWS video. And then we put in our sudo password, and now our AWS_video should have permissions of only one person can read and write and everyone else doesn't get to look at it. Cool. So the reason why we do that is because now we can SSH in as the user of choice, which because I've already used this before, it's already yelled at me for doing this as root. So I know that the user it wants me to use is the SSH Ubuntu at, and then the IP address of this server, which I have to go check. And that is, let me see. It's not visible because this UI is not responsive. Let me see. Let's click on this one and let's grab this IP. Cool. And then let's come back over to here and let's SSH in as Ubuntu at this IP. And then we pass in a -i and then we pass in our SSH key right here. We can go ahead and run this. It'll ask us if we want to trust it. We say yes without thinking. And then we should hopefully eventually get into the server. Cool. At this point, we can do a sudo apt update maybe to update our stuff just to make sure that we got all the latest goodies from the goodie bag. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to do a, well, I guess we have to do a ssh-keygen, right? We'll save this under /home/Ubuntu. Sure, no passphrase or anything. And now we want to cat our /home/Ubuntu /.ssh/id_rsa.pub. We grab the public key and then we come over to our GitHub page, and under our account settings right here on the right or the left side, we can add a SSH key. And then after we click add key, we can paste in this key. We can name this AWS_video. We can add this, and that will then give us the ability to use that SSH key. So I'm going to go ahead and add this off camera real quick. Okay, so that has now been added. Now let's grab this code block right here, do the SSH clone. We'll do a git clone with that repo. And yes, we want to trust it. And now we have it. So let's cd into AWS_video. And now we can go ahead and run those commands. So the first one we're going to have to run is the Docker build. Because this comes with Docker, we're already good to go. We can go ahead and run this and we can start deploying this Rails app. Now, generally, this is kind of a painful process, but here it's actually going to be pretty easy because of all of the stuff that the Dockerfile handles for us. We don't have to go around, playing with all the configurations and installing all the dependencies. We also don't have to install Rails or Ruby, which is fantastic because, dear God, can you imagine? But this is going to take a minute, so I'm going to just move my stuff over here, and I'm going to wait for this to finish. All right, now that that's done, we're going to do one extra step, which I guess we can actually finish with this real quick. We're going to run the Docker volume create, and this will then allow us to start our server. If we come over to our actual config and into our master key, we want to copy this master key. You can save this as like an environment variable or however you see fit. In my case, I'm just going to copy it in. This is going to allow us to actually run this, but we have two options now. One, it's going to yell at us for using SQLite in production. Probably want to use like Postgres instead. The other thing is, we're running this behind port 3000. I'm going to show you how to expose that port real quick because it's important to learn. With Amazon, it's a little bit more confusing. And then I'm going to show you the proper way to probably do it. So first things first, we have to come into our EC2 instance. We have to go to security and then click on the security groups. In here, we can add or edit inbound rules, add a rule, custom TCP, set it to port 3000, and then set it for 0.0.0/0, save that, and that's going to allow inbound traffic to port 3000. Now we should be good to, I guess I have to full screen this again. We should be good to come back to our EC2 dashboard, our instances that are running, click on that instance, get the IP address, and come over to here and do port 3000 behind that IP, and we now have the stuff working. So we can do test case, attach a image, we'll grab the Docker image, we'll create this post, and then we can wait for this to work, and there we go, there's our image. But what if we don't want to go to port 3000? Well, for that we can use Nginx. That's right, we're also going to be covering Nginx in this. So to do this, we're going to have to do a sudo apt install Nginx. That's why we did the sudo apt update to begin with, so that we had all of the stuff for Nginx. This will then eventually ask us if we want to do the stuff. We're going to go ahead and say yes. That will give us the Nginx packages downloaded. And once that's done, we should then be good to set up the Nginx stuff. So I have to actually find the Nginx setup because there's a sim link that it always wants you to set up, and I can never remember what it is. But this shouldn't be too bad. I actually found it already. I'm going to drag this over. I will also have a link to this in the video description. It's a DigitalOcean guide on how to set up Nginx on Ubuntu 22.04. But basically all we have to do is we have to make sure that we enable this server, and we can do that by creating a file inside of the sites available. So we're going to do a sudo nano /etc/nginx/sites available and then the name of whatever we want to call this. So I'm going to call it, I don't know, I'll call it AWS_video. Okay, so inside of the AWS_video, and let me just come over here. Inside of here, what we want to do is set up a block that looks like this. I realize I just pasted it in, which is very rude of me, but I am a little bit short on time today, unfortunately. So what we can do is we can set up a block that listens for port 80, which is the default HTTP traffic. We give it a server name that doesn't matter. We set a location block, which is just the slash. So if we visit our IP address with just the slash, it'll then proxy pass that to an http://localhost port 3000, which is our Docker container because it's running on port 3000 on localhost. And then we just pass in the rest of the stuff because it's stuff that, Nginx has to send through to the Rails app for one reason or another. We then hit Control-O and Control-X to save and exit. And then we have to create this disgusting symlink because this is a available site, but it's not an enabled site. And there's a directory for this with is the enabled sites. So to do this, we can do a sudo ln-s/etc Nginx sites available, And then we want to grab what is it? The AWS is what I called it. So that's the file we want to create a link from, and we want to make sure there's a copy of it in the Nginx sites enabled location. Go ahead and save that. And let's just go ahead and take a look at the /etc nginx nginx.conf file. So this is the main conf file that configures your Nginx stuff. And in here, you can see that it's somewhere down here. It's going to include the sites enabled directory. So this is why all of the stuff in your sites enabled is actually enabled, because inside of this main block, it's including all of those files. Just something I thought would be worth noticing or noting. Now let's go ahead and do a sudo service nginx restart. And now let's go ahead and let's run our command to start our Rails server again, which is this big old Docker command. You could also throw this into like a script or something so you don't have to type this every time. This should run. Let's now come over here and let's get rid of the port 3000 and just hit enter. And we'll see here that this is taking us to the default Nginx page. So let's go ahead and let's go to, I have to remember, we have to do a rm for /nginx or /etc nginx sites enabled. And it's like the default, I think is what it's called right here. We're going to go ahead and remove that. We're going to have to sudo to remove it. And now let's do a sudo service nginx stop. And then we can do a start just to make sure this is all working, because I think the default one is going to take precedence. So that should be started now. And let's go ahead and let's restart our Docker container. You can see how quickly this restarts now that that's working, and that'll take us to the root of our application. And we now have a Rails server that's been set up in a Docker container fairly easily with like 4 or 5 commands. And then we have Nginx working as well. And it was still faster than most other tutorials previously were, because this 7.1 change from Rails is like the single most welcome thing I've ever seen. But yeah, hopefully this was interesting. Hopefully it was helpful, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.